Philanthropic giving to U.S. higher education institutions exceeded $52 billion in 2021. That is a ton of money. What do you need? What do I need to know about the back ends behind university fundraising, and how will transforming it speed up education outcomes for students? That's why my guests this week are Chelsea Lamego and Alejandro Stevenson-Duran. They are the co-founders behind FundMiner. FundMiner empowers nonprofit organizations to raise more money, effectively administer funds, and reduce risks through a comprehensive suite of solutions. I'm super excited for this conversation. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. There are a lot of them. So whether you're totally hyped on AI and you're ready for that robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave and delete all of your social media accounts, I totally get that. I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay. I'm a product market fit strategist, innovation consultant, and venture fundraising advisor. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of fundraising in higher ed. Chelsea and Alejandro, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, Lindsay. Hey, thanks for having us today.
Did you know that $52 billion number? That is something like that?
We've heard a lot of numbers thrown around out there. There's about $500 billion that are gifted to charities in the U.S. every year.
Yeah, because I introed and we're talking like about universities, but you guys serve nonprofits broadly, not just universities, right?
Correct.
That's right.
Correct.
Cool. Yeah. So $500 billion. That's a lot of money.
A lot of zeros.
A lot of zeros. Yeah. So let's start with our first segment. Crystal ball, what does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, tell us their hot take. So I'm going to rapid fire some headlines, and Chelsea and Alejandro, I want you to say, yes, I want that to happen, or if you know anything, yes, that is happening, or no, please no, whatever comes to mind. This is meant to be like a warm-up conversation, okay?
All
cool.
Right.
All right. So FundMiner firmly believes in tech for good. You shared that with me. So we're going to start with some for good predictions. This is a new one. I think I've only brought it up once. It makes sense. So nations are giving animals, trees, and rivers the rights of people. So New Zealand granted personhood to a river so it can now sue anyone who pollutes it. Good idea? Bad idea?
Certainly sounds interesting.
So for those of you who are listening and aren't on YouTube, we've got some tentative smiles like, what did Lindsay just throw us? I threw you right into the
That was a tough curveball. I thought you were going to show a couple of fastballs before this curveball, but I like it. We're here for it.
The only other person, his name is Asim Sani. He was also in Techstars back in 2018. He said, hey, if corporations can be people, then rivers can be people too. What do you think? Maybe?
I can see it. I'm going to call. I see it happening.
If someone's going to figure out what the legal loopholes are to make that one happen, but if it helps our climate, I'm all for it. All right, here's a different one. Maybe it's easier. Lab-based meats will hit more plates. So while the number of vegetarian protein sources that look like real meat has increased, we haven't yet seen like the cell-cultured cutlets in grocery aisles. So what do you guys think about lab-based meats?
Yes, I think that will happen more and more. I think it won't happen in the short term. If anything, it was sort of a big trend and still is to some effect. But, sort of the second wave of awareness of, hey, just because it's not red meat or fill in the blank meat doesn't mean it's healthier, because there's a lot of complicated things like sodium content and other substances that these early sort of lab-grown meat are susceptible to. But I am an optimist in the tech space in general, and I do think that bioengineering and advances in other places will actually help us uh, derive better meat products that are better for the body and that taste a bit better. That's
Yeah.
something I'm looking forward to.
Hopefully better for the planet too. I know what's driving a lot of this is just, the gas that animals emit is a
Oh, yeah.
big contributor to our climate change. And so being able to create real meat in the lab, saving the gas from the cows and other animals would be a great, great advancement. So Chelsea, do you have an opinion? Are you a vegetarian? Do you like the idea of lab-based meat?
I don't love the idea. I think it's probably a matter of time until we see restaurants popping up that are all, serving lab-based meats. I'm not sure you'll find me there, but who knows? Maybe.
It's reminding me that I had an episode with a founder of Plum Diamonds. Plum Diamonds makes lab-grown diamonds, and I know one of the concerns in that industry is whether jewelers are disclosing that the diamonds are lab grown or mined. So I wonder if we'll have to disclose whether a ribeye is lab grown or from an actual animal. So we'll see. Let's move on to the next one. We'll turn to ed tech. This should be an easier one. So the school to work path will be turned on its head. So companies are dropping degree requirements and colleges are facing an unprecedented enrollment cliff. So competition amongst them is high. So can the school to work path, can it be turned on its head? Yes or no?
I think that's a really interesting one because I think that there's a lot that students learn throughout their higher education careers that goes beyond what they're learning in the textbooks. And so I think for me personally, while that's not typically always a hard requirement, it is something that I still find myself looking for. And I do think that that's something that will continue shifting and changing. And I think that folks who particularly have a lot of experience within one vertical or industry can sort of jump beyond that easier than someone who's maybe jumping around a little bit and exploring different careers, who can kind of fall back to their degree or what they studied. But I think that it is. I think that higher education will still be something that is looked at on resumes for a very long time into the future. There's also other skills, and Alejandro can add to this specifically on the technical side as well. But there are some other skills that if they can, I think, do the job, you are very willing to look past whether or not they've got the degree. So at the end of the day, it also just comes down to talent and skill.
So if I can summarize that, you're saying higher education has its role in the school to work path for sure. Someone that might be highly specialized in working in an industry for a long time, maybe they don't have a degree, but they've stayed so focused, they are an expert. Otherwise, the degree is something that candidates can fall back on if they've done a lot of exploration in their careers. Alejandro, I think maybe what do you have to add, especially when it comes to like hiring tech talent?
Of course. First, let me preface this with a comment of yes, even though there might be specific cliffs on enrollment when we look at specific data types in universities. I also think that this new world, especially after the pandemic, wherein remote work became so prevalent, also remote education saw a huge spur. So this is also a great opportunity for universities to be able to adopt a more scalable model wherein enrollments are not limited to 100 or 300 students per auditorium, but
Hmm.
really, however much your servers can fathom, as long as that experience and that learning experience is there. And that sort of ties in with the answer to your question, Lindsay. I think these the big tech corporations, as well as more medium and small sized technical employers, uh, will be also looking into these sort of all virtual or hybrid education degrees with a really good and a keen eye. I think the students that are able to self-manage their time, derive learnings from a self-paced course online, has a really good chance of being successful in a remote world environment as well.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I have a whole kind of thing, some thoughts on, whether degrees should be required or not for software engineers.
Hmm.
I don't know if you would agree, but one, I don't like it if someone has the title of engineer and does not have an engineering degree.
Mm,
I think I fought hard for my engineering
that's fair.
degree. And there's other fields of engineering where you cannot call yourself an engineer unless you have a professional engineering license and continuing credits. So, like, I don't like in tech that some people are getting the title of software engineer that don't actually have those credentials. I
Hmm.
also think that there are certain places where the credentials should be like a higher standard. So when we're talking about our nation's like security infrastructure, financial infrastructure, those types of things, I think we should have higher standards for the technical talent that works on those. Just the same way, again, that you need a professional engineering license to design a bridge as a
Right.
civil engineer, you should probably have a professional engineering license if you're going to be working on our FBI, NSA, CIA documentation, or even simply the fraud department at most of our Fortune 50 financial institutions.
Couldn't agree more with that last part, Lindsay. I do think that there is a good need for more granular and standardized certifications within the software engineering field, uh, especially now in this day of an age of data and the importance of privacy and security. I think services that has thousands or millions of users are putting all of those users at risk if there is some negligence on the side of the software engineering side, which without the standards or without knowing what you don't know, it's sort of an easy hole to fall into.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more. It would make the job easier of folks like myself in Chelsea when we're looking for qualified engineers, if we have that piece of paper, whether digital or physical, that can tell us like, hey, we know exactly what sort of courses or knowledge this engineer went through.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always like when someone agrees with me on that one. It's like one of those issues that I might die on a sword over. And not everyone agrees with me. Chelsea, what were you going to say?
I also really like that you brought up the fact that you did it. You went through the education, the credentialing, and fought hard for that. And I'm not gonna lie, I feel a bit the same way from a non-technical degree for like business as well, because it wasn't easy. You know, I put myself through school. I worked jobs on the side to pay for that and support myself at the same time. And so there is a part of me that feels like there's something to be said about folks who can start something, see it through, finish it, and fight hard to complete it. And so I understand like there are a million different circumstances and so many different backgrounds and ways to get there. But I will say that I would be lying if there wasn't a part of me that really appreciates that, you know, person who understands like that's a common expectation to have that type of degree and I'm going to fight through it no matter how hard it is for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the whole conversation around school to work path turning on its head is about equity equal pathways for all, and the fact that the existing system doesn't work for everyone. And I think that the existing system can evolve without, and new systems can be created without everything being turned upside down. So I think you all are nodding. So for those of you listening on audio only, they agree with me, of course.
Absolutely.
Okay, next headline. Philanthropists will demand less and trust more. So this is totally out of I don't know anything about this. So this saying grant making.
I would turn that on its head.
Listen,
Okay.
granting and applying for grants requires so much micromanagement and so much paperwork. So this trend is saying that there will be a move to a more trust-based philanthropy. Now, I know that nonprofits would love trust-based philanthropy, but can private offices and other funds take that leap?
I think that donors are going to just thinking about the common consumer, right? And what our expectations are and how used to we are nowadays at having information at our fingertips and expecting a well-run organization and operation. I think that I mean, trust is actually at an all-time low right now. I mean, your average citizen trusts a company more than government or nonprofit in this current day and age. And so we all have some work to do there to improve donor trust, I think, generally. But I think that it is the duty of the organization to put the information in front of the donors so there is no question about trust and that they just know their money is being put to work and they see the impact that's being made. So I think that the onus is really on the organization to get ahead of that and be sharing their impact and sharing goals ahead of time before they even accept the funding. What's your strategic plan?
Onboarding in all aspects of life, whether it's onboarding client projects, onboarding fundraising, donors, onboarding startups into an accelerator, or onboarding users into your platform. So important because it creates expectations and a baseline for any relationship. So I agree with you. I think this is a hope, right? But it's not really happening, right? We'll say that it's a hope, but it's not really happening.
Also, personally, I'm looking forward for the bar to be raised, simply because, I think philanthropy and nonprofits in general, it's easy to exclude them from typical supply and demand and competitive nature of, a capital society. But I don't think that's the case in its entirety. And if anything, we're
Not,
trending
yeah.
towards that same place wherein, hey, if I'm a donor and I want to give $10,000, and my local university wants to convince me to do that. In the past, maybe the option or the decision vector is, hey, I will give you $10,000, or I will just keep these $10,000 for myself. But more and more, with the surge of awesome nonprofits throughout the world, now my organization is not competing with a with a no, but it's competing with, hey, I have $10,000 to give out. Who do I gonna
Yeah,
want to give it to? Do I want to
right.
give it to this local organization that might not be giving out the best impact reports, or will I be giving it to all of this competition on other nonprofits because I care about social causes, and they're just doing all that much better in the operations that end up improving my trust and transparency.
I imagine we might get into this as we start to really talk about what FundMiner does, but I do want to agree with you. Well, one, Chelsea shared on her LinkedIn that someone else's post that, nonprofits make up a third or rank third in terms of workforce. So how many people in our country work for nonprofits, and for the average person, also understand a lot of hospitals are nonprofits and a lot of universities are nonprofits as well. I know here in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania, the hospital is nonprofit. and it is like the first or second largest employer in the region. I also want to highlight, Alejandro, you said, just elevating the standards of both of you about reporting and like what is possible. And I imagine FundMiner helps with this. I remember hearing a statistic that 90% of US aid projects fail, and 90%, sometimes 100% of projects that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation fund fail. And so, 90% of startups fail. So I broadly say people tend to be bad at solving problems, or we just try a lot of problems before we find the solution. Yeah. But I do agree. I think that I would love to see nonprofits be elevated to a level of reporting and metrics and visibility that some private companies meet as well. So, last one, we're gonna switch to fintech, because FundMiner is also a fintech platform. So the rise of artificial intelligence in fintech. So this is like, can AI do this yet? Let me know. So let's start with an easy one. Can AI scan accounts and recognize anomalies?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So like fraud detection, dispute detection, those types of things.
Yes.
Can AI provide personalized investment strategies based on an individual's preferences and risk tolerance?
Yes.
It can.
Mm-hmm.
Is it allowed to? That's a different question.
It is a different question.
It depends on if the company, I guess, is certified financial advisors, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And also the opt-in of the user, and that they understand that this is,
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Can AI do this? Can chatbots act as financial advisors?
They can, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not as good as human advisors today, because I assume you're asking about today's capabilities. I don't think that they would be on the level of a top-notch human financial advisor today, but maybe in the future.
They can't act in full capacity as financial advisor. I've heard AI talked about like it's just a kid right now. It's just maybe a 9-year-old or a preteen or something, and it needs to be mature into being an adult. So if I were to talk to a chatbot today around financial advice, am I talking to a 13-year-old, or am I talking to a college student?
Well, that's the thing about, and this is a fun question. That's the thing about LLMs today. In some respects, sure, you might be talking to a kid when it comes to their reasoning capabilities, and being able to derive some insights or creativity. But if you cannot find a 13-year-old kid that has better memory than these LLMs. If you are talking to a kid, but you're talking to a kid that was trained on terabytes of open source data, and that is extremely good at recollecting and seeing patterns. So based on whatever prompt you give, that kid is almost always gonna shoot out with an answer. And
so just for everyone listening, LLM, large language models, like GPT is one of them, and that's what most people hear about. Okay, so it's a 13-year-old photographic memory wonder kid that knows a lot, but has the maturity and reasoning capability of a 13-year-old.
I could get behind that.
Mature for his age. Okay. So that brings us into the meat of this episode, deep dive. In this segment, we get into the details about a specific technology's implications for everyday people. So FundMiner is cleaning up the back office for broadly nonprofits, but specifically also universities that work on building and strengthening relationships outside of the institution, collecting and administering fundraising dollars. So why don't you tell us, like, what does the average back office look like for your customers? And Chelsea, I think you had a personal experience in this field.
Yeah, so I this sort of all started actually in my last job. I was working for a large university in their advancement office, and we were doing all of our reporting in spreadsheets, and that was largely because our data was stored in multiple siloed systems. And so it was really using VLOOKUPs and index matches was really my only way to combine data. And these organizations are, of course, very large. They're at scale, and you've got folks across different divisions and departments who are all managing different accounts, and each of those accounts or funds have different restrictions and purposes. And so when you couple hundreds of people and thousands of funds, all with unique purposes, and then siloed systems that are unintegrated, well, you kind of get a lot of confusion, right? And so
Yeah.
FundMiner was really a solution that I came up with to serve as that bridge for all of those folks to have access to the information they need on the funds they oversee so they could be more effective with their funding and utilization. And this really also gets into, in some respect, the highest and best use of funds, and aligning that with institutional priorities and trying to maximize your impact. And so when we're talking about universities specifically, or even academic medical centers, community foundations, who we also serve, this funding is being used to support scholarships and fellowships and for programs and for research. And so the more effective we can be with our funding, the more impact we can make on the communities that we serve. And so our technology is meant to do just that.
So to kind of reflect back to what you're saying is that, like so many other places in our world, so many bureaucratic organizations, a lot of technology was acquired in silos. And so there's information gaps and overlaps of data that has to go between each platform. And every time you have to go from one platform to another, there's opportunities for mistakes and errors. And so to kind of help you or help your customers, like they, or like what you were doing is like you're manually kind of blending all of these into a spreadsheet so that you can make your decisions, but it's taking you hours probably to create that spreadsheet just to come up with that decision. And that means it just takes longer for everything, for the funds to get where they're supposed to go, for you to report back to your donors.
Exactly.
A lot of
And
paperwork, right?
yes, a lot of paperwork. The other thing too is a lot of these organizations have endowed funds that exist and are invested in perpetuity. And so you're adding more and more funds every year. And so the problem or pain point is really just increasing year over year because you're also introducing more departments, typically not at a super fast pace, but nonetheless, there still are more people. The organization's typically growing by having more departments, more programs, more majors.
Right.
That means different funds to support those areas. And so the problem isn't a sort of one-time fix either. It's a recurring, growing administrative challenge that has the potential to have big impact and touch on a lot of lives.
Well, yeah, money makes the world go round. So it powers everything those institutions are doing. So, Alejandro, you were not in this space before
I was
FundMiner.
not. No.
So, what were your biggest, like, wow, jaw drop kind of observations as you joined Chelsea and started to understand the magnitude of the problem around fundraising?
Yeah, good question, Lindsay. So I would say two big jaw drops moments I had when I was introduced into this overall space. The first was really understanding that the problem of operation management is such a tough thing across the industry, for especially once you cross a certain threshold in size, right? Once you're in the hundreds, let alone thousands of funds that you manage, each, well, many with its own purposes and restrictions. It's essentially extremely tough to scale and to be able to spend that money effectively without the use of technology. And that ends up hap- that ended up leading to my big jaw drop of, hey, a very non-trivial percentage of the money that large organizations can have is not spent. And this is not because it's strategically put aside. Sometimes that's the case, but many times it is not spent simply because it is not known, or there is just not enough human bandwidth to deploy those funds effectively. Because one of the things that organizations don't want to do is just spend the money willy-nilly as if it was unrestricted. They can't do that, and they
Well,
don't
they're
want.
not allowed. It's kind of like what happened over the pandemic with a lot of the government funds. I know the federal government, I have a cousin who was hired to help uh, kind of close out some of the government funds because the money's just sitting there and it hasn't been allocated
Yeah.
or spent yet.
Yeah.
And that money can be put to good use, but if you don't have even the bandwidth to go through it, then students aren't getting scholarships, or labs aren't getting improved,
Yeah.
all of that.
Well,
So
Exactly.
it's also for much of these folks who are actually in charge of these funds, it's a very small percentage of managing the funds themselves is a really small percentage of what they actually do. So if you're a faculty member, you're trained in that area and you're trained in teaching. And so
yeah,
then you've got someone from the advancement office like me coming over and saying like, "Oh, hey, but there's all these funds, and by the way, in order to know what to spend it on and how to use it and how much money you have to go into these 5 systems, or I'm going to do my best to send you a monthly report, but with 200 people, I don't
yeah,
know if I can." And
And,
so
and 5 minutes later, they need to teach quantum physics to 200 students. So
yeah, right. Oh, wow. Okay. So I know that, a lot of people way outside the industry hear about these big funds that universities have, these endowment funds, and then wonder about scholarships and everything. And in the back end, your target customers are like, we are doing the best that we can.
mhm.
We don't have enough time.
Yep.
Interesting.
well, and
So you want to
there's
say
not.
one more thing, Chelsea?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I'm sure it's rarely a malicious situation as much as it is like we're talking about scale here and infrastructure and technology challenges. But and I'm sure there are, and we've seen in the news, like, sure, there's some malicious behavior within charitable organizations, but I
Sure.
believe that it's largely an industry who's trying to do good and in the world, and they're doing what they can, and so we want to just do our part in helping them power that function and make more of an impact.
Yeah. So you all call FundMiner an automated AI powered fund management platform. So maybe you can talk to me about how you are using AI to help solve these problems.
Of course. So we're leveraging AI and experimenting with AI in a couple of ways. What is now? I'll talk about sort of the short term and then the medium and longer term in terms of our efforts within FundMiner. Short and immediate term is how can you leverage AI? Because it turns out the nonprofit industry does have a lot of very rich data sets that are open source and that are out there, right? Unfortunately, not a lot of nonprofits have full-time data scientists that are
Sure.
scavenging through these data sets and being able to featureize their models and actually derive
Right.
insights that are useful for their day-to-day operations. And that's where FundMiner comes in the short term, specifically within our domain, which is the operations and the fund management of your gifts. We allow you to know, just based on the data that you've already have with us within FundMiner. We allow you to know exactly where you stand when it comes to how effective you're being in deploying those funds and in maximizing your social impact based on whatever your mission is. And we compare your effectiveness with that effectiveness of the of thousands of organizations. And again, that's where data, open source data comes into play.
I imagine you can, so what you're saying is that you have some open source data that allows you to create a score for effectiveness.
Yep.
And so you can give your current customers an effectiveness score based on what they're inputting into your system. And then you can compare that to what the open source data set has. But also, as you grow and have more customers, then you can build your own data set of effectiveness, right? And
Precisely.
be able to compare how effective is our distribution of funds and impact compared to other fund miners.
That's precisely right, Lindsay. And I would like to say a couple of things. The first
A little
is
bit of healthy competition would be nice. Yeah.
one of the things that I will say for sure is the scoring is a big win for these organizations, but also being able to provide them with the insights that are actionable. Like, hey, these are the factors where you might be falling a bit behind, and this is the ones that you're excelling. So whatever you're doing, keep doing that in those respects. So deriving insights from these scores is something super actionable from these nonprofits and large fundraising organizations that they can leverage.
Yeah. So when you first talk about the problems in the back office, some of the improvements seem straightforward, kind of interoperability between platforms, just better workflow management. So is AI, like, is your customer ready for all these AI insights, or are they still like, hey, we just need to get the notion of just being more efficient first on our side?
Yeah, that is a good question, Lindsay. I think right now the customers are eager to jump into this improvement of, hey, let's derive insights that are currently useful. Let's not promise the moon and deliver something else. Right now, what we're promising is something very within the grounds of, we all know the handful of big factors when it comes to gift administration that are the most important.
Mm-hmm.
What you don't know is how you're doing in relation to the industry, specifically
Right.
to those that are similar to you. So
I
that's
guess if they're focused so much on just like, can you help us float rather than sink, are they thinking about flying yet? That's I guess what I'm talking about, right? It seems like FundMiner has some basic cleanup for them to do.
Mhm.
And I imagine that some of your customers would be like, let's shoot for the moon and go for it. And others are like, I just would like to stop treading water and get on this raft, and we'll sit on this raft for a little while. And then you can start talking to me about AI improvement efficiency scores. Is that the case?
I mean, definitely we don't think of FundMiner as like, hey, we are an AI company and we revolve around AI. We leverage AI to empower FundMiner users in whatever their use case needs to be. At the end of the day, we are a fund management platform and we aim to maximize the impact of those organizations. So for all of those organizations, and they do exist out there, that they are not ready for AI or they simply don't want to leverage AI at this moment, most of the value that that FundMiner derives is actually from an awareness and the combination of these siloed systems. So I think
Yeah.
they're getting the most bang for your buck there. And then the AI piece is a nice cherry on top for those that want to jump on this wagon. But
And then
we're
they'll,
excited to evolve with them too.
once they get that like kind of over the hurdle of like just like streamline our workflow, I imagine then they can start thinking about how they can start improving those numbers to and be competitive and
Mhm.
reach bigger goals. And sometimes it's like you just got to focus on cleaning up the operations first, before it's kind of like, let's get in the habit of going to the gym before we decide that we're going to enter a bodybuilding competition,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and cleaning house and the operation space is not a trivial task. To your point, it's something that there needs a lot of intentional efforts and resources, even with the use of technology. So you're absolutely right, and we foresee that within our customer base, we're going to have varying levels of hunger for these sort of features, and this is why we're doing our best to make sure we keep an eye out for them and make sure we cater to to the different masses.
Well, I think it is awesome what you all are doing. I had someone say to me when I was very early on in my career that, the best entry points for startups are in places where, no one else is looking. I worked for a company that worked in like audiology offices. It was like no one, the company I worked for, all they had to do was offer the same features but put them online. And this was like 20 years ago, right? So I like that you guys are cleaning up a space that probably doesn't get a lot of attention, but is certainly managing a huge amount of money and has a far-reaching impact with their activities. So kudos to you to entering that market. While I have you on Make Sense, I'd love to do the final segment, which is who needs a safety net? In this segment, I ask my guests to share, risks, failures, learning lessons of entrepreneurship and creating their own path into the future. And so each of you has entered the tech startup world from a different vantage point. And I'd love to, maybe Chelsea start with like, what was like the big like shock and awe, and what are your big takeaways now that you're kind of in the game?
Yeah, so for me, entrepreneurship has been really central to my heart since I was very young, and I'll spare you some of the stories that poor Alejandro's heard over and over and over again. But I just always have a hunger for like how can I create a little business and make some money. And so I tried a lot of things. I mean, in high school, I sold and made scrapbooks, custom scrapbooks, before realizing like the time and margins it took me were terrible. I was like super young, like left my house and tried to sell as a child like popcorn by the handful for quarters, and just always was like real. I at some point like organized and barcoded people's wine cellars, like super random things that I was always interested in exploring. But I also was always working full time, supporting myself. I put myself through college and lived on my own from a very young age. And so there's a sort of requirement to, do a job and make money and do the work. And then I had this entrepreneurship thing on the side that always actually lit my heart up and made me excited. And I actually that was my concentration in undergrad. I studied entrepreneurship. And so when I ended up working for the university, I loved my job, had an amazing team, was doing really well and moving up. But I kind of would look at, my boss and his boss and say, well, that's not really what I want to do. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm working toward. And when I looked back, my favorite project or thing I worked on was this platform. And so
Yeah.
it sort of was really natural to me that I would pursue that. And I was, fortunate enough to, as I started digging in and researching there, I found there was a market and was a great opportunity here. But I think that ultimately my path was always entrepreneurship and building.
It's in your DNA. It's in your DNA. But what about like, it's pretty audacious as a non-technical founder. You're building a tech startup, and you've moved really, really quickly. So I guess, yeah, what culturally, have there been any big kind of adjustments for you in getting into this?
I think the biggest adjustment was honestly the security. Having these, I was always doing well in my jobs and felt very highly secure in them. And so taking the
Yeah.
leap quitting my job and starting a startup before we had funding, of course, was really scary. I mean,
Mhm.
I have a mortgage that I have to make sure that I cover,
Yeah.
and so I think for me that was one of the biggest sort of shocks or sort of items that I was afraid of. But the more I learned and got into it, I realized, I mean, one, we were fortunate enough to secure funding, and so we've got runway and we're covered for a period of time as we scale and grow the
Mhm.
company. But I also learned that if you are driven and determined, it's all about researching your market, pivoting, and
Yeah.
finding a way. And so
Focus.
I think there was also like a point where I realized it's going to be okay as long as I'm always committed and driven and dedicated to this.
Yeah.
And so
You have to build confidence in yourself, and for sure there's some adjustment period when you don't have a paycheck where you're like, how do I have fun and buy myself things that I need when
uh,
I don't know if I have any money coming? And that is definitely one of the first shocks a lot of new entrepreneurs have to go through.
yes,
No.
of course I think so. But really that transformation of getting comfortable in not knowing your future, I think
Yeah.
is was an
It's
interesting
hard.
one.
It's hard stuff. Alejandro, you worked at Microsoft, so you've been in the tech world. What's it like to build something from scratch? I think a lot of engineers and product managers and designers coming from big corporations, they're used to working on existing
Yeah.
stuff, not as much as like really going from 0 to 1. So, uh, what has your experience been like entering, going from big tech to small?
Yeah. So definitely extremely fulfilling because I do consider myself a builder, and part of the times where when I am building stuff, whether it's something totally useless or something like an actual useful thing to do, uh, I just like building stuff and that overall process. When it comes to FundMiner, that from the start, it was an incredibly impactful and fulfilling experience. A lot of that was because I had the pleasure to work with a lot of awesome people like Chelsea and the rest of the FundMiner team, but really because of the customers that we serve. Um, with FundMiner, we are trying to cater to those people that help people. So having those interactions and being able to have almost daily conversations with prospective customers, talking about
Hmm.
their pain points, and sometimes showing them our solution ourselves, and seeing how their eyes pop up was an immensely fulfilling experience to see, like, hey, they're uh, they shouldn't be having these pain points, because
Yeah.
what they're doing, their day-to-day job and their mission, is so much more important. So by us helping them achieve that, it just fills my heart right up. And in terms of the shift, one of the things that I did have to sort of check myself was in a large company, where I worked in a large company up in Seattle. I We would be getting some customer feedback. It was a big enterprise feedback, and you would take that and you would roll with it, because there were probably 10 people of layers, or maybe a bit less depending on your products, but sometimes it does get to that level, that once the feedback reaches you from the customer to the folks that are building, uh, there's a lot of things that would happen. But
Hmm.
because you don't get that feedback very often, you would take it and go, right?
Yeah.
And now, if anything, we're getting a lot of feedback all around the board, right? And sometimes that feedback doesn't coincide. So then it's up to you to make sure you have enough data points and have a very clear vision as to what your product is and what you aim to solve, so that you take the feedback that you're going to roll with, and then you sort of combine it into something actionable that is useful
Yeah.
for the product users. So I think that's a big shift that we've had to do very early on, or at least myself personally.
I love that you brought that up because I have a lot of videos on my YouTube channel about how to process user insights. I call it the silent killer.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all of the user feedback you get, jumping the chasm to like what you actually act on is the silent killer. And
Mm-hmm.
I have in one of my slide decks a picture of just a bunch of like wires all jumbled up, and you have to figure it out. What you're saying is that a big corporation, someone else has already decided that this is the important information. Whereas for you all at the very beginning and processing it firsthand, you have the challenge of um, one, making sure that you're not listening to any loud users, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
just because they're loud doesn't mean that what they're asking for is something that all your customers want,
Yep.
right? And then taking insights and saying what this person is saying at this company and this person is saying at this company sounded different, but they're attempting to do the same thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
their outcomes are the same, and like how can we design something that works for both of them? And I think a lot of lazy enterprise designers have just built two ways of doing the same thing instead of looking for the elegant minimalist kind of solution in that design. So I love that is a really great lesson because it hits on what I think is most interesting, what one of the things that I think is very interesting about starting from scratch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's make it make sense. The world of fundraising, what we said at public institutions, $52 billion. There's a lot of money, and we want to see it be put to good use. So FundMiner is helping us and helping those institutions clean up their operations and make better decisions. Is that right?
That's right. You
Cool.
got it.
So thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tabus, and my guest, Chelsea Lamego and Alejandro Stevenson-Duran from FundMiner. We hope you enjoyed our take on philanthropy and giving. So where can everyone find you all online?
They can visit our website at fundminer.com.
Okay, cool. Are you guys on LinkedIn? Are you on Instagram? Like, what are you like? Are there any other ways to find you? You might not be on Instagram because your customers aren't on
Yes,
Instagram.
LinkedIn is definitely the big one for us. We are newly on Instagram, but not the most exciting photos being posted there. Um, so
Still a
don't
tech.
any of those artistic listeners were probably not going to be who you're looking for. But we do love sharing interesting content on LinkedIn, so that's a great place to follow us and stay up to date.
Awesome. So, as always, to the Make Sense listeners and viewers, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. Final note though, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, of course, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits on YouTube. Subscribe for next week's episode, and for audio only, follow wherever you get your podcast. Chelsea, Alejandro, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Great.